Okay, now I'm going to review null hypothesis significance testing real quick to help us with the interpretation of the statistics, and then I will run a correlation. So the null hypothesis is that there's no effect between the variables or no relationship based on the data. The alternate hypothesis is the hypothesis that we came up with. The general alternate hypothesis is just that there is an effect or a relationship between the variables based on the data. And then we also listed specific alternate hypotheses, an H1 if you will, that predicted exactly how those variables would be related. The variables could be different than one another but related in different ways. So there are different alternate hypotheses that could be taken. You chose one, but it could turn out that male and females do drink differently, but that we predicted it wrong and the opposite one drinks more, for example. Okay, the p-value is just the conditional probability of achieving an observed outcome if the null hypothesis were true. So if the null hypothesis is true and there is no relationship, then what's the probability that you're going to see the pattern of the data that is in your data set? And if it's a really low probability, then the null hypothesis probably isn't true. It's based on the sample size. So as sample size goes up, the p-value goes down and vice versa, which means that this is not an effect size. It's not telling you how much the variables are related because it's going to change based on how many people are in your sample. So if you want to know how much the variables are related, you need an effect size. These are going to be a bunch of different statistical values, but it'll tell you about the strength of the association, and then you should be able to find some sort of guidelines for interpretation of those variables either in this document or online somewhere. And then the level of significance that we're going to use is, or the critical value or alpha value is p less than 0.05. So if p is less than 0.05, then we will say that we have found a significant difference. And then I have some language here explaining that. So if p is less than 0.05, their results were statistically significant, unlikely due to chance, and the null hypothesis is rejected. And if p is greater than 0.05, then the results are not significant, they're likely due to chance, and the null hypothesis could not be rejected. Okay, now that we have touched on that, we're going to go ahead and run a correlation. Our two hypotheses were that people who enjoy music will also tend to enjoy movies. You probably had a different second hypothesis here, but mine was that people who enjoy country music will also tend to enjoy Western movies. Okay, so to run just a normal Pearson's correlation, which is a correlation between two normal variables, you do it like this, and it gives you a Pearson correlation. But if you remember from last time, the data was not normally distributed. Music was a skewed variable. So you can actually do a Kendall correlation in that case with a non-normal variable to see if the two are related. And you see the p-value is 3.29 times 10 to the negative 12. So that's 0.00011 times 329. So very, very small p-value. So these two things are related. People who tend to like music more also tend to like movies more. And down here, I put the answer to that. Hypothesis 1, the null hypothesis was rejected. People who like music more also tend to like movies more. Okay, now we're going to run a Pearson's correlation for our second hypothesis because those variables were normal. I'm just going to copy the Pearson's correlation code, and then I'm going to put in the two variables that we want to look at, which were country music and Western movies. And we'll run that correlation. Okay, this Pearson's correlation was 0.33. So if you look at our interpretation right here, that's about a medium effect size. So these were related medium amount, and the p-value is much less than 0.05. Again, it's 2.2 times 10 to the negative 16th, which means that these are related to one another. So people who like country music more also tend to like Western music more. So we'll go ahead and type that out right here. The null hypothesis was rejected. People who liked country music also tend to like Western movies. There you go.